You gotta talk to yourself. You gotta be willing to walk down the road and talk to yourself. You gotta be willing to get in the car and preach to yourself. And I don't care if you have no robe to preach, no briefcase to preach, no credentials to preach. When you're going through hell and high water, you gotta talk to yourself. The Bible said that the sick, bleeding, hemorrhaging, hurting woman began to say to herself. So you see, it's what you say to yourself that gets you to live.
You got to be willing to walk down the road and talk to yourself. You got to be willing to get in your car and preach to yourself. I don't care if you don't have no license to preach, no robe to preach, no credentials to preach, no briefcase to preach. When you come through hell and high water, you got to talk to yourself. The Bible said that this sick, hemorrhaging, bleeding, hurting woman began to say to herself.
Now, if you think this video is going to be in support of T.D. Jakes, then you have come to the wrong video. If you think this video is simply going to be about how great sermons are repeated often by other people, you have come to the wrong video. What this demonstrates for us who are deconstructing from Christianity is the fact that these sermons, these mannerisms, are all an act. Just as the young lady was acting her way as if it was a script from the T.D. Jakes sermon, so too does T.D. Jakes act his way through his own sermon. Now, I don't know if he borrowed certain aspects of that sermon from some other pastor, some maybe pastor that he had seen in a local church who does not have the type of following that he had at that time frame. But we can see that it is all simply just an act. She tries to make her voice sound like T.D. Jakes, tries to emphasize the same points of C.D. Jakes, try to put a little R in her voice in the same way so that she can get that same type of reaction that he received from that exact same sermon. But we see that T.D. Jakes put on the performance originally. It would be like going to see Hamilton now and trying to recognize and seeing how the new cast is emulating the previous cast, because that's all that you see. So when I ask Christians, what do they learn in church? What are they learning about the Bible? Oftentimes they're not learning anything. What they're doing is going there to be emotionally fulfilled by the acting that is going on by the different pastors and preachers by which they are subjecting themselves to these feel-good motivational messages that they are talking about. You know, it's not a bad message that you have to talk to yourself, because you should be your biggest cheerleader and you have to say things that you want to be in your life, but you literally really have to believe those things and then do the work after those things. And they happen to mention the woman with the issue of blood. This actually was one of my favorite stories in the Bible because it demonstrated some of the hermetic and alchemical thought processes of energy transformation. Transmutation, I should say, simply because within the story, it talks about the fact of how this Jesus character, who is supposed to be God, felt the power go out from him. He felt the energy go out from him. Now, if you are God, then you must always be God. That means that no energy can leave you, no power can leave you. You have to maintain that power at all times. So it was one of those lessons that helped me on my journey to realize that Jesus cannot be God, and that energy transmute from one form to another, can go from one person to another, can go from one source from another. Many people go out and they sit in the sun like me and my wife did today and absorb some of that sunlight, that good energy from the sun that we was missing here in San Antonio for a few days with all the cloud coverage. But it was one of those stories that demonstrated that how the apostles were at that time frame, when their treatment of women, and didn't think that this woman should be able to touch this Jesus. And I know many people are like, oh, from the hem of his garment, there was enough power in just the hem of his garment that and through her faith, she was healed. But it demonstrates also the polarizing mentality of the people of that time frame, of how they treated women and Women were not supposed to be able to touch a man, and if it wasn't your family or your husband, then you ain't supposed to touch this man. Yet this woman struggled and fight in order to touch this man, go against what the society had said. And although the apostles wanted to kick her to the curb, the niceness of the Jesus character said, no, 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 no. She is healed by her faith, and so on and so forth. But it demonstrates that this was a misogynistic, and still is a very misogynistic religion. So the fact that this sermon is being utilized and repeated and copied and done as a production instead of teaching people exactly some type of lesson that would actually benefit them. Instead, it's a theatrical performance, and this theatrical performance has been repeated. I can remember many different sermons growing up in Marietta where I was like, he sounds just like Reverend Young. Oh, he sounds just like Reverend Lockhart. Oh, he sounds just like, because they all just go and they copy each other. They are not original in thought. They simply just mimic what they've been heard, what they've heard from other pastors, and the same thing as the people in the congregation. You just mimic what you heard from a pastor or heard from some other speaker, and yet you haven't taken even the beneficial lessons that you can find in this book to be able to use for yourself, which is why Christians remain in a mental, physical, and emotional state of poverty. But if you want to alleviate yourself from that poverty, then begin to study for yourself, begin to learn for yourself, and understand how the universe works. You don't need a Jesus. You don't need any type of Messiah, because the only Messiah that actually exists is the one that is inside you. So always remember that you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.